So welcome to Kermode Uncut, and my chance to sit down with your comments, your responses to my posts here on the blog. A number of themes running at the moment because it was a while since I did the last replies. One of the things I've been talking about was whether or not we're all overly obsessed with box office. This is because I went to see a film and I knew in advance that it had done very badly in America, and I wondered whether that had somehow tainted my opinion of the film. Many responses to this. Here's one from Weird Not. Box office figures are like the lives of celebrities. Very boring, a complete indulgence, and totally irrelevant. This, however, from Marcuse Muse. I, for one, am someone who monitors box office ratings with a nerd-like obsession whilst giving it no respect as a commentary on the film's merit. I rushed to see Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, as I did Dark Knight. Loads of you mentioned Scott Pilgrim vs. the World because, of course, that died at the box office in the same way that Howard the Duck did, but I really like that too. This from Neon Man. Apparently, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World bombed at the box office, even though all of my friends went to see it in the cinemas, and it's very highly spoken of amongst us. I mean, this does reflect one of the issues. Just because loads of people go and see a film, it may not be kind of loads of people that you know. Equally, everyone I know has seen Possession by Andrzej Zułowski, but I think if you take a straw poll on the street, that's not going to be true. This finally from Daniel. Box office has a major bearing on what you watch at the cinema, whether you like it or not. A film that dies in the US may only get a limited release in the UK and none at all in Northern Ireland. Conversely, big successful screen blockers like Avatar squat in your local Cineplex, greedily consuming 3 of the 8 screens and deflecting smaller, less profitable releases which would otherwise have been screened for a week or two. See, try as you might, you can't get away from the box office. Onto a subject rather closer to my heart. I was complaining recently that I'd seen a load of horror films and they just weren't scary, notably Insidious, which incidentally other people seem to have found far more frightening than I did. I thought it was very boring. I was saying, look, is it just me or have horror films stopped being scary? What was the last horror film that really scared you? Loads of responses. I think more responses to this than anything we've ever had here on the Kermode Uncut blog. Here are just a very few of them. This from Gregory Stevenson. The Orphanage really freaked me out. I watched it late at night alone in my house that makes peculiar noises at the best of times, especially the pipes. Better than 3D in my opinion. I haven't ever had that feeling before as an adult, and you're right, Mark, it is a good feeling. I really understand it with The Orphanage. Not only do I love that movie, but the soundtrack of The Orphanage, we did a blog about it here on the Kermode Uncut site. It is a really extraordinarily creepy soundtrack. This from Driftin. The last film to genuinely scare me was Neil Marshall's The Descent. I watched it when it came out around Halloween time, and I went to a midnight screening of it on my own. The long, silent walk back to the car afterwards was almost as unnerving as the film itself. No horror film since then has had an effect on me like that. I'm in complete agreement with this. I really like The Descent. I'm slightly claustrophobic anyway, and I remember going to a preview screening of it, and the first 40 minutes was really tense, a real knuckle-chewing terror. I really like Neil Marshall. Bear in mind, that film cost so little money. You compare it to, for example, the James Cameron-produced Sanctum, which cost 50 times as much and has none of the thrills, none of the excitement, none of the adventure, none of the sheer terror. This from Kieran Moore. I'm hardly ever scared by films, especially the repetitive torture porn that American studios have recently become fond of. But the French film Ils, Them, I think, is pretty creepy stuff, especially the opening sequence, a good example of effective paedophobia in recent horror. I do like that film. I don't think it's brilliant, but it's very stripped down, and it does have that great sense of sort of amorphous, edgy terror. This, finally, from Adam Jack Jones. For me, it has to be Pascal Laugier's Martyrs. I did a blog about that here on Kermode Uncut, a modern classic that I feel gets a lot of negative press for its split narrative and unfulfilling conclusion. In spite of its flaws, the film had me hiding behind my hands and left me feeling well and truly shaken. I can't think of a single film since that's affected me in the same way. We're here on the South Bank, and just a few nights ago I did an onstage here with Kim Newman, the author of Nightmare Movies, which he's just updated, and we were talking about, have you ever seen a film that you thought went too far? And I was just reminded that I nearly walked out of Martyrs, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I stayed to the end, but there was a couple of moments in it I thought, I actually can't bear this. It's gone over the edge, but I'm really glad I stayed with it. That's a really tough film. And finally, in the rather disappointing wake of the release of Red Riding Hood, the new Catherine Hardwicke movie, she made Twilight, I was saying, what do you think are the best screen adaptations of the Red Riding Hood story? I mentioned films like Freeway or Company of Wolves, which of course is based on the writings of Angela Carter. Many responses. I'm just going to give you one because this is my favourite. This from Russians Eat Bambi 66. What's the best telling of the Red Riding Hood story? The Silence of the Lambs, of course. Jodie Foster is Red Riding Hood, who is confronting one big bad wolf, Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, in the hopes of catching another Buffalo Bill. We see Red Riding Hood all over this movie, not least in the scenes showing Buffalo Bill quite literally making himself a grandma suit in his dungeon. The wonderful scene in which Starling sees the sewing set and the moths inside Bill's house is a genius remodeling of the famous "what sharp teeth you have" moment in the book, as that same chill runs down the spine when you watch it. Now, I don't know whether that's an original theory. I certainly haven't heard it before, but you know what? I'd buy that for $1.